Hello again. Thank you very much for joining me here on Movie Ninja. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the new Netflix stop motion dark comedy, The House. The House is an anthology film. It is comprised of three separate segments with three different casts of characters set in different time, places, and different dimensions. There's not really a lot of cohesion among these three stories, and there's aside from a few sort of like nudge and winks to passing references of characters from the preceding segment, they have virtually no interaction between each other. They're all fairly equally segregated. The first segment has to do with a man that I assume is a country squire that is from a once affluent family, but has since allowed his own his own family to fall into relative impoverishment. Once again, I say country squire, and it is clear that his relations treat him as the poor country cousin of sorts. So when he is offered a grand gift of a palatial estate, I mean, what could go wrong? He willingly accepts it, and the story then proceeds to turn into a prototypical, but for what it is, pitch perfect ironic horror. It The designs of the characters in the first segment were not particularly impressive to me. They do have a sort of a relatively human veiled appearance. It's clear that the felt that is used on the character models is probably an attempt to sort of like maintain that, human guise, but at the same time, there's a distinct lack of expression with all of the characters. They all have the same facial mode, and it never actually changes from angry to surprised to sad. It's all fairly interchangeable to the point where it almost seems more like you're watching a marionette show, or more like a static puppet show at times. So while the story is serviceable, it's decent for what it is. You can kind of see it coming from a mile away. Do these people own the house, or does the house own them? Yes, even if it's fairly predictable, you do feel for the main character, the daughter, voiced by Mia Goth, as she tries to do her best to preserve her sanity and to keep her baby sister safe. Um, Moving on to the second, a little bit design wise, it is more impressive. Story wise, I think it's actually the most lacking of the three. The second installment refers to a mouse refurbisher in I'm assuming in London. He's trying to make a rundown of former mansion into something a bit more profitable. It's clear that he's pursuing this project with cutting certain costs because he wants to sell this house not as the next accomplishment as a real estate agent or trying to get into the business necessarily, but mostly to cover his own personal financial failings. He does have some trials in getting the house ready, and strangely enough, the people that seem most interested in the house actually mirror a permanent infestation of pests. This second installment could have probably been the strongest if it was developed just a little bit more. It has a very good air of surrealist nightmare quality that from the beginning to the end of it, you can see a spiral into madness for the main character, but it felt rushed. It felt like there wasn't enough of a segue to this payoff. And while I do have some sympathy for the character, I mean, it's clear that even just going into this, okay, I'm trying to sell off this house to cover my debts. Maybe he didn't do it with necessarily good intentions. Oh, I'm a real estate agent because I would like to help people buy their first home. No, it's clear that he's trying to foster a wealthy clientele to probably just feed into his own spending addictions. But at the same time, he doesn't deserve the outcome that he gets at the very end. So you do extend a bit of sympathy for this character as the audience, but it still feels like the resolution and the conclusion to the story is very rushed, strangely enough. Once again, it is sad because it does have some interesting, surreal sort of concepts behind it as to exactly, how nightmarish buying or selling a home can really be. But aside from that, it felt a bit too rushed. So I will say that, it is the least developed. It does have a significant uptick in design quality, but it is the least developed story out of the three. And the third story actually revolves around a young landlord and her inability to sort of let go of the past and to part ways with the house that she grew up in that hopefully, will provide her a stable future. But it's clear that that's not possible. All the other characters see this except Rosa, the main character. And after the first after the first two segments, I was very tense. I was very anxious as to exactly what's going to happen. Am I going to see a Junji Ito short but with stop motion? What's coming at me, please? The third segment, I will at least say, one, it is a complete self-contained world. It is actually the best when it comes to its own completion. And it is also cathartic. It is also refreshing. I am so glad that not all three segments languish in misery. I very much appreciate that. We needed some sort of tonal shift. And coming to the final third of your film, you really do need that. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. I will say this. I did appreciate it's in between. It's better developed character designs for the hair and felt designs for the cats. Essentially, the cast is comprised of anthropomorphic cats. And I do appreciate the design work for them. So it's better than the first segment. Not perhaps as detailed as the second segment, but a good in-between. A very good, very serviceable in-between. Once again, the story is the most complete. From beginning to end, this is a properly set up, a properly paced, a properly written short film. It is all self-contained, and from beginning to end, you have an entire character arc. You have a character arc in less than a half hour, because it's rough. The entire runtime is roughly feature length. It's about an hour and a half, but it's surprising how much of a story you get out of the third segment. You have everything that you need. You have a very eclectic cast when it comes to Rosa, Elias, Jen, and Cosmos. One, I can actually recall the names of the characters. Movie Ninja, you just saw it. Of course you can recall. I can't recall the names of... Except for the daughters, Mabel and Isabel in the first segment, I can't recall any of the names of any characters in the preceding two segments. And once again, it's just because both of those felt very rushed to me, even though the first segment was, as I mentioned, a bit more successful in its story completion. It was also a bit cookie cutter for the type of horror story that it actually was. You could fairly see it coming a mile away. But once again, moving on and concluding, the third segment is the is the best developed. So, grading this film is a bit of a mixed bag because you have to more or less work it on averages, weighing the strengths and weaknesses of all three. I would say if the third segment was a complete film, I would probably be giving it a 7 or an 8 just on its own. The first two segments, the first segment was still unsettling for what it was. Even though I could kind of see where it was going, it was still unsettling. And so the horror aspect was successful there. The second one, the surrealism, well, instead of really enthralling me or sort of like captivating me, I was confused at the very end. And I really don't put that up to the surrealist aspect of this man as he's kind of going crazy because of the difficulty not only in selling the house, but of these very strange trespassers that he has to deal with. But it just felt that it was incomplete. It was far too rushed. And it was the most incomplete story. It could have been a little bit better, I think, with just maybe 5 more minutes, some sort of explanation as to exactly why things escalated the way that they did. For him, cognitively, mentally, psychologically. I'm talking redundantly. Excuse me. So, but weighing this all out, I would still give it a solid 6.5. As I mentioned, the third segment, it relieves a lot of the tension and the stress that you feel from the first two segments. And yes, so it's definitely a breath of fresh air. You need that. You need that relaxation to a certain degree. And the ending, while still somewhat vague and ambiguous, still works. It sort of it leaves you with a very distinctive thematic feel versus the first two. Once again, we're not wallowing in misery, and I appreciate that. So, overall, I give it a 6.5. I think it was very well done. It's a very interesting and creative idea. This idea that this, where you live, it can dominate you, it can possess you, but it can also liberate you. A lot of people are very intimidated. I mean, home ownership is an understandable, desired goal for many. It's harder and harder to obtain nowadays, and even when you actually cross that line, it can be extremely frightening because of just how difficult regular maintenance and costs are when it comes to this. So sometimes it can feel claustrophobic and confining and really restrictive, but it could also be very liberating, and just understanding what you want out of your residence versus just what can it do for you, but how can it benefit you as well. So I really did appreciate that the third segment offered this idea of where you live being a liberating archetype, a liberating sort of idea, rather than just something that anchors you to one place and it presses you down and it's oppressive and anxiety inducing. So yes, these things actually work well because they're fairly the ideas are fairly surface level for the first two segments. Third segment is actually quite redemptive. So that's my review of the new Netflix dark comedy, The House. What do you guys think? Have you seen it? What are your thoughts on it? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Did you like the segments that I didn't like? Please let me know in the comment section down below, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.